This instructional video demonstrates how to apply the Ossy levered outrigger kit onto a thermoplastic splint. The first step is to make a thermoplastic splint for the hand to the point corresponding to the level of the joint. This demonstration focuses on the MCP joint, but Ossy can be used for the PIP and DIP joints as well. Once the thermoplastic splint has been trimmed and prepared for the MCP joint, measure the distance between the MCP and PIP joints.
You sit the lever over the joint and drop the lever down to the next joint, the PIP joint. If it sits on the joint itself, then that's the correct length, or else you can actually measure from the MCP joint to the PIP joint and use the appropriate size of lever. Joint replacement. Pre-surgery, the fingers are ulnarly deviated. The surgery is to correct them and bring them into line. And so when the splint is fitted, the levers, instead of sitting directly over the MCP joints in line with the fingers, can be offset slightly so that they give more of a radial pull, so that it prevents the fingers wanting to slide back into that ulnar direction.
The next step is to mount the appropriate lever on the thermoplastic splint. One recommended way of doing this is by heating the thermoplastic on the bottom of the pivot block with a heat gun. It's important to take care that the pivot block is not overheated, as this could hinder the movement. One option is to apply gentle heat to the thermoplastic splint to ensure enhanced adhesion. Press the heated thermoplastic pad onto the splint so that the lever is in line with the finger, ensuring that the pivot pin is located immediately over the MCP joint. Occasionally, as MCP joints arch, the lever may not sit flat. In such a scenario, one option would be to pack the lever at the side if it's sitting off the splint with a little bit more thermoplastic so that there is no gap left. Using the 10mm by 17mm loop, fold the strip in half to find the centre. Unfold and remove half the backing paper and cut this part of the backing paper away. This will make it easier for you to slip on the D-ring. With the flat of the D-ring on the backing paper side, thread the D-ring onto the strip of loop to the midpoint, carefully removing the remaining backing paper and bringing the two self-adhesive sides together, ensuring the D-ring is still central. Using the 10mm by 100mm hook, remove the backing and place the hook on the back of the splint in line with the finger.
You can also trim this Velcro if you don't want it to be as long on the splint. It can be trimmed.
Attach the spring onto the spring retaining bar located on top of the lever, with the open end of the spring facing downwards. Next, attach the other end onto the D-ring. The loop carrying the D-ring is positioned on the hook so that the angle of the lever, when placed forward, is between 20 to 30 degrees from the vertical. In other words, perpendicular to the long axis of the bone. This can be adjusted when it is on the patient's hand. Measure the finger sling material on the patient's finger.
Allow a little bit extra rather than being extremely tight on the finger. You can either mark it off or hold it and cut. So then that would fit on the finger like that.
Fold over and punch a hole through the ends of the material.
If you feel as if it's going to impact on any of the joints, you can actually trim this. It's quite soft and it can be trimmed.
Thread the nylon tie provided through the holes in the ends of the sling and then through the lever. You can adjust the sling positioning by shortening the length of the tie. Make sure the spring is not stretched at this point. This process is then repeated for each finger. The next step is to attach the straps to the splint and adjust according to the patient's size. You can use stockinette underneath the splint to make it more comfortable for the patient. Trim off any excess Velcro and place it to make sure it's in the right position.
Obviously, if a patient's fingers are sore, this will stretch, so make sure you just stretch that rather than get them to move too much.
Adjust the finger ties to bring the fingers to a neutral position but not in hyperextension. Each tie can be trimmed down.
You can trim them right down, but you may find that next time the patient comes, if it does need a slight adjustment, you may not be able to catch hold of the last bobbles.
The dynamic hand splint is now ready. For dynamic stretch, for example flexion contracture, the tension on the spring can be increased to ensure that no more than 300 grams of force is applied. Here's a recap of the steps. Prepare the thermoplastic splint for the hand. Mount the levers above the MCP joint by heating the pivot block and pressing the thermoplastic pad onto the splint. Fit the D-ring onto the loop provided. Place the hook on the back of the splint in line with the finger. Attach the spring to the top of the lever and the D-ring. Using the finger sling material, fold over and punch a hole through the ends for each sling. Thread the nylon through the holes. Adjust the sling position by shortening the length of the tie. Attach the Velcro straps to the splint. Fit the splint and check for flexion and extension.